But good day, everyone. Once again, thanks again for joining so much, and to the Endangered Wildlife Trust for really making this a possibility for us. I'm so excited to be here, so excited to be part of this, but I think more than that, to be part of this journey, because this is the first step, and there's so much more to come out of here. It's been wonderfully outlined by the previous speakers. We've still got a very long way to go. It's our first step, and I must say big ups to my company. I'm very thankful that they took this step as well. So Sibanye Stillwater, we are so excited to be part of this world first approach to biodiversity and accounting and disclosure. And we also count ourselves fortunate to be the first mining company out of the gates to be able to disclose against the Biological Diversity Protocol, and also give you a little bit of a taste into our nature stewardship journey to date. So I'm going to be very brief. I really do want you to focus on the science today, everything else that sits behind the scenes that can help your company, or perhaps even your valuation that you do as an investor, or perhaps even if as a consultant or interested in affected party, to understand the disclosures that we are undertaking and that other companies can undertake, and that you can perhaps assist other companies to see that this is possible. So I'll just be briefly covering some Sibanye Stillwater's biodiversity commitments. These are high-level commitments, and then we'll be unpacking into numerical commitments, and that's part of our roadmap. And this is why I'll also be presenting to you on nature stewardship roadmap, and then a few other key considerations to frame the BDP. We saw earlier, really do need to understand the framework in which we are evaluating and disclosing our biological diversity results. We trust that we will be able to demonstrate today that the BDP can be effectively implemented and used across complex areas, disparate geographical regions, and a multitude of businesses with different ways in which you assess and manage and approach your biodiversity decision-making processes. And ultimately, this is to lead to a unified approach in how we get to this nature positive future for all. So first of all, let us just unpack Sibanye Stillwater's biodiversity commitments. Ultimately, you will see this a direct link to the Sustainable Development Goals and the United Nations Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, starting with a halt of biodiversity loss and moving in ultimately into that net gain space. So there's two very key areas. So our one commitment is for our new operations, where we've committed to no net loss. And then our second commitment is for our existing operations, where we've committed to a net gain from the date of takeover. This still needs to be unpacked into the numerical percentages, hectares, hectare equivalents, which will still be coming. So hopefully we'll have this discussion sometime next year again, and we can unpack those a little bit more. But let me just explain how our no net loss and our net gain aspirations work. So in terms of new operations, we see these operations as ones where we've been able to execute on the mitigation hierarchy from day one. So from the day that we're able to develop, it means we're actually able to execute the full scope of the mitigation hierarchy. So from avoidance all the way through to restoration and offsets. This allows us to really make sure that we minimize the impact from day one on our natural resources. And in this space, we've got our United States operations who really, and you'll see this coming through in the BDP results with the greater positive biodiversity footprint on their side. And they've really been able to execute specifically on these avoidance and mitigation measures. And therefore, they have committed to this no net loss target. It is, in fact, the more stringent target that we've set. Then in terms of our existing operations, we are committing to that net gain from the date of takeover. These are typically operations decisions around how the operations were developed and managed were made prior to us taking ownership. So our commitment there is that we want to improve from that date of ownership so that we can see an improvement in biodiversity over time. That will particularly come through in our restoration phases. However, in both of these operational phases, so whether it's new operations or existing operations, the key commitment here, or the key point for us is that we want to try and limit that increase in a negative biodiversity footprint, or ideally not have the increase and have a net gain occurring. Great. So just a quick snapshot into our roadmap, our nature stewardship roadmap. So our journey started with the policy, the frameworking around this for our environmental, social, and governance policy. From that, we then built a biodiversity position statement, and this defined specific requirements to achieve our commitments and strategies, and led to the development of the biological diversity procedure. Constant mentioned, we've traveled this journey for a long time together, and I was very fortunate to be brainstorming, working on our nature positive solutions at Sibanye Stillwater at a similar time that the BDP was in development. So this BDP really has become a core strategy in our biodiversity procedure in order to manage. We can't really make numerical commitments if we can't even account for our biodiversity footprints. From there, we still have a lot of work to do, but we have at least released our first biodiversity footprint, and you will see it provides a nice combination of various ecosystem types across a very wide range of our business. And moving forward, we will be setting these numerical targets, and Sibanye Stillwater will be aiming to include them as incentive-based targets. So really embedding these nature-based targets into our business, making sure that our business decisions link up to what we want to achieve from a biodiversity perspective. And then moving forward, there's always going to be more work to be done. So we are looking at renewed approaches for species assessments. We have had conversations with EWT and a number of other organizations to find unique ways of assessing our species, especially within a specific regional or site-specific context, and in terms of those material species and how to effectively assess them. There's certainly not a one-size-fits-all. And then I just want to mention, I've outlined a very few key steps throughout all these processes. I just want to highlight that we are still embedding the mitigation hierarchy within our organization, continuing to execute on ecosystem and targeted species assessments, and investigate in rolling out nature positive initiatives, particularly continuous restoration at our operations. Then let's dive into a little bit of the technicalities around what you will be seeing shortly and how we frame our BDP results. So that organizational boundary is one of the key steps that we just need to outline. We have looked at the direct operations, meaning that it's our direct area of influence. We will be looking at expanding this as we move forward. But I think a very important point was raised earlier by Joel, is that you need to manage what you can. You need to be able to make commitments that you realistically can execute upon. So it's not to say that we won't expand, but we need to think about how we're able to expand and ensure that we're still going to be able to live up to our commitments. So there may be some level of improvement that always needs to occur. It is based on our available data sets. This is science-based, so we do use the available site-specific national science-based monitoring and assessment protocols. And I do want to note that we're also going to continuously improve on these, reassess, and so you will see our biodiversity footprint being evaluated, reassessed, and then disclosed. This will be an annual disclosure for us. Our commitments currently focus on the operations that we can execute on the restoration phase, so where we have an end life of mine or an end to the activity. Now, why this is important is we do have operations such as, for instance, our precious metal refinery in Brakpan that can, in essence, continue into perpetuity. Of course, this is to the benefit of biodiversity, because at least the same impact is not caused now by a new area. We continuously use the same area, but we do still need to look at how we're going to incorporate this into our biodiversity commitments, because we do not have that restoration. So we specifically want to unpack offsetting and potential restoration for downstream areas, and that requires partnerships outside of Sibanye Stillwater itself. And this is why, as I said before, we do not take these commitments lightly. We are going to only commit when we are able to say this can be achieved. And I promise you, that doesn't mean we stop our work. We are very much focused on this. Lastly, just to mention, our management measures focus on key ecosystems and species. So you are going to see that we disclose on all the ecosystem types within our direct operations, our footprint area, and it is a very large footprint area. But when we look at our management, we'll focus first on those key ecosystems and then over time expand to the surrounding catchment. Of course, we acknowledge the fact that the surrounding catchment will likely have a very strong impact on our key ecosystems, which is typically our wetlands, our ridge systems, and our forests. So there's a lot of integration that occurs there. And with that, back to Gabby. Thank you so much for allowing me just to share a little bit on our side. And I look forward to seeing our results and seeing the questions and answers that come out of that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I think just framing the discussion in terms of the policies and commitments makes the results really so much more tangible and embedded. So thanks for that. And yeah, I think the report is now officially released. We've pasted the links in the chat. And I'm going to now take us through some of the key results from that footprint assessment and give some of the highlights in terms of some of the science about how we went about doing the footprint. And then there'll be a panel discussion around what this means. There were already some questions that have been posed, which we'll get to during the panel discussion between all of us. So yeah, without further ado, let me share some of the exciting results that we have. So really just thanks also to Sibanye for this. I think the full disclosure that we're presenting today is something that is quite special. That is a leader and taking a real leadership position. So really excited about this. This is the one-page summary. This really is the culmination of all of the work, which we hope is easily digestible and really should speak to what everything is. And I'm going to just unpack this one-page summary a little bit more and make sure that we kind of follow it and go through that. The full report with all of the maps is available as well, but this one-page summary ultimately gives everything that you will need. So what did we do? We assessed nearly 50,000 hectares, and I think this is a significant number to highlight. I think this really shows how much work went into this and really how important it is that this is the first global consolidated footprint for all direct operations. And it's also just geographically disparate. So it was done both in the Sibanye operations within South Africa. There were 10 sites which were assessed. And then there were 2 sites in America for the Stillwater operations, which we assessed. And as Simone mentioned, we used site-based data as well as satellite imagery and assessed the extents and conditions of ecosystems which were impacted by direct operations. We consolidated these accounts using the metric hectares equivalent. And the USA sites also included the species inventories. And what is the big result and what does this mean? So essentially the baseline footprint. So it's important to highlight the baseline footprint, which is since takeover for all of the sites consolidated, came to 87% negative or transformed in some way, and 13% positive, which is really important to unpack. So it's first of all, it's important to look at the hectares equivalent. So there were over 43,000 hectare equivalents in terms of the negative footprint and 6,400 hectare equivalents in positive footprint. Now, really important to unpack here is that this is since takeover or since operations began for the American sites. The South African sites have been in existence for many years, and so Really, we assessed baseline conditions from when Sibanye was responsible for some of the takeover and the direct operations, and then how that's changed over the time period since takeover. And we used both ecosystem kind of measures for terrestrial ecosystems and for local indicators for wetland ecosystems. The ecosystem inventory, as Joel referred to, is really important to highlight, and this highlights where the conservation potentials also come in. You know, we're not only talking about corporate biodiversity footprinting here, but how this can relate to nature and reducing footprints which are negative. So Sibanye Stillwater's ecosystem inventory holds 37 ecosystem types. There were 24 in South Africa across the 10 sites and 13 in the USA across the 2 different sites which were assessed. And then to break down for the 2 different countries, South Africa had 89% negative footprint, 11% positive, USA 28% negative and 72% positive. In South Africa, as I mentioned, many of the mines have been in operation for a very long time. The negative footprint since Sibanye took over has only increased 0.2%, which is fairly insignificant. Now, I'm not going to go into what is significant and what is not in terms of this, but I think it's really important to highlight the fact that there has been little change on the ground. And also to highlight the fact that 6 of these ecosystem types are threatened ecosystems. And so there is potential for really improving these footprints and really looking at conservation opportunities within some of these ecosystem types, where corporates can act as custodians and stewards of really critical habitats that are remaining. In the USA, it's the negative biodiversity footprint increased by 20%. And this is because these sites were essentially greenfields and they were earmarked for mine development. So since mine development commenced, the negative footprint has increased by 20%. So consolidated between South Africa and the USA, that makes up the whole footprint, which you saw earlier. And it's important to highlight that the aim, as Simon has said, is to avoid and mitigate further negative impacts during operation and to ultimately restore and improve the positive footprint area upon closure. Why is this important? And I think this has definitely been the topic of the day from all of our speakers, but this specific disclosure of this report is a major milestone. It's a world first in that it's the first biodiversity footprint assessment of all operations across different sites, across different geographies of a business which makes exclusive use of site-based biodiversity state data. Joel really highlighted this in his talk around how we need site-based data, real data for ecosystems and habitats on the ground and the condition that they're in, as well as for species, to really look at the numbers of species that are in these areas. And this has really enabled Sibanye Stillwater to better identify the risks and opportunities in different ecosystems. We now have an ecosystem asset register to work with and to look at and to delve into where we can make the most positive impact by working together in conserving some of these important habitats. And it also allows Sibanye Stillwater really to assess the scale of their positive and negative impacts at a consolidated level and communicate those impacts for target setting. I think we spoke about target setting earlier, and that's always very important. And it's a critical area where companies now can set targets based on real data. And this shows what is possible with that. So thank you very much for that. That was a whirlwind tour of the one-page document.